Welcome to Reselling Podcast. I'm Mike.
And this is Orlando, and we're here for another Monday minisode.
Yeah, and today we're talking about everybody's favorite thing, inflation.
So it's interesting because I never thought ever that we would ever talk about inflation on our podcast.
Really? I mean, I feel like it's kind of goes hand in hand. I mean, inflation affects anybody who has any kind of dealing with the economic system, right?
True.
As resellers, like we talk about all the time that we fill a very specific void in the market and the economic system. We kind of fill in the gaps, right? Because there's often a gap between, what people think something's worth or how much supply is versus what things are actually going for. And that's what reselling often is doing, right? We're finding those gaps. We're filling in those gaps until the market catches up. So, when it comes to something like inflation, this is one of those areas where there's a big change, upset, or gap in the market. And so it's absolutely going to impact what we do, how we're doing it, why we're doing it.
No, agreed. I just was thinking, the entire time of the podcast, last 4 years, we really haven't had to deal with inflation.
Yeah, I mean, it's been the typical.
There, but
yeah. I mean, everybody kind of anticipates that there's going to be the value. I mean, really, what we're talking about, because a lot of times people get very upset when the idea of inflation or things like that, and they kind of take it politically. Really, the idea of inflation is the value of your dollar goes down, right? So, like the good old adage, or the common thing people would say is, our grandparents they were so afraid of investing because of what happened, with the big crashes and all of that, the Great Depression, that they would stick their money in a mattress. And then, when they died, it's like, oh, look, grandma saved $5,000 in her mattress. And this money was from, the 40s. Had she invested this, it'd be worth $150,000 right now, So really the thing is, if you have money that is in savings, right? Or if you're on a salary and you just have a income coming in, if you're making $50,000 a year and that's your salary, that's what your company pays you. Well, by this time next year, if inflation continues the way it's going, or even if it just stays where it's at now, your $50,000 is worth less today than it was this time last year or the year before. And so we kind of have to figure out, what do we do with that as resellers, right? How do we deal with our prices? How do we deal with, paying ourselves? How do we deal with, all of the things, and how can we potentially even take advantage of a situation like inflation?
Well, and that's one of the first things I wanted to address, that luckily, even if you're part-time, that reselling allows you to leverage inflation. And what I mean by that is, you may be at a workplace, and like right now, if you were to, let's say Mike at his place was to get a 5% raise, he's still making less money than the year before, right? Because cost of living has gone up because of inflation. And so as a reseller, though, you have the ability to adjust a lot of things in your business, right? You choose how much you get paid, right? We read The Richest Man in Babylon and paying yourself first, right? You choose your prices, you choose how much work you put in. And so if you're working a 9 to 5, right, you're stuck, right? Right now, I'm not sure, there's a lot of businesses that are trying to raise everybody's salaries to, equate themselves with the current inflation, because supposedly the inflation is transitory, but we've been told that since I think like June.
Yeah, well, and the idea too is something like that is, you've got to believe whether or not things correct, right? Maybe everything goes great by this time next year, we're back to normal inflation, but regardless of that, there was such a huge increase in prices that the value of the dollar has permanently gone down. Like the chances of your dollar being worth more than it is now in the future is so unlikely. Like you don't see that in a system like ours. In a fiat system, we're not going to see the value of the dollar go back up, right? Like as it happens. And the thing is, you're right. Like, so companies, we can talk all day long about, there are companies that are trying to pay their employees more, but usually it's at the lower levels, right? So, you're taking in a person who's making minimum wage, you pay a person making minimum wage more money. But if you're the average middle class, you're working a kind of a salary job, they're not going to say, hey, the increase has gone up significantly. We've increased, 80%. Because I remember I worked at a company where they kind of did that, where they were trying to even out salaries, and they realized like, hey, people who started, today are making more money in some instances than people who've been here for 4 or 5 years. And like, now we have to raise their money up. And then the people who are like in the management position, because I was a supervisor there, it's like, sorry, we can't touch your salaries because we're trying to make it right with all the people below. Right. So so the idea of paying yourself is, your money is worth more today than it is tomorrow. That's the bottom line. Like with inflation, and there's always inflation, whether or not it's like really bad and we say like, oh, these numbers are high. a dollar today is going to be worth more than a dollar tomorrow. And so that's one of the reasons, like, I don't do, as a teacher, I don't have them withhold money and pay me in the summer. I take all my money and I pay myself in the summer because I can use that money now, make interest off of it. And so, yeah, you might realize, hey, instead of saving so much for my company, it might actually be more valuable. As much as it stinks, I need to raise how much I'm paying myself out of my company business in order to meet these inflation costs. And that is a benefit of reselling, is you could say, hey, my business brings in $8,000 a month. I pay myself $3 because that's what I need to cover everything. So I'm saving $7, I'm buying new. Maybe
I'm reinvesting in my business.
Yeah, exactly. I'm reinvesting. So maybe you need to say, you know what? I need to up my salary and I need to take $4,000 instead of $3,000 because everything is now more expensive. And so you have the freedom to do that as a reseller, but that does impact how much you can save. So you have to realize, like, there's going to be an impact on your business one way or the other. So one of the ways is you kind of have to offset those things. You know, if you were making $10,000 a month, paying yourself $3,000, you've got $7,000 for reinvestment. Well, now if you have to increase your pay, now you have less to reinvest. So what do? You might have to raise your prices. I mean, that's really what inflation is across the board, is prices are going up everywhere because the value of the dollar is down. So as resellers, we need to set our own prices and say, okay, these items that I'm selling, I might have to raise them. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a significant amount. If you raise the prices across your store by 5%, right, I don't think you're going to see a 5% drop in your sales. You might if your pricing is like terrible, but if it's,
as long as you have best offer, you should be okay on
right.
eBay.
But if you're on eBay and you're typically selling this item for $30 and you have to raise it up to $31, people are recognizing that things cost more money and you need to raise your prices a little bit in order to make sure that your business is not starting to move into the red.
Yeah, agreed. And so, again, this is a tough one because there's a part of me that, I raised all my prices, but I raised all my prices with best offer, right? If it's buy it now, it's a little trickier, right? Because during a bad economy, there will always be those buyers that will pay top dollar for your items as long as you're selling collectible, unique items, things that people are looking for. But if it's the everyday, right? Whether it's, I sell a lot of hiking shoes or shoes, cowboy boots, clothing, like those items, it may be tough. You may want to raise your prices, but if you raise your prices, are you pricing yourself out because they're coming to eBay looking for a deal? So these are all things you have to manage. I have no answer for this one. I know my personal way of doing it is I have raised all my prices. Shirts that I would sell for $34.99, I now sell for $39.99, and I had best offer. So the market will tell me, right? Either people are going to pay outright for it, or they're going to, I'm going to get all these lower offers and go, okay, maybe my price is too high.
Yeah, and there's always a little bit of like, growing pains or like a rubber band stretching, right? Is like another illustration people use, and it's going to take time to find that right balance, right? Because your cost of living has gone up. I'm sure you're paying more in gas than you were before. I'm sure you're paying more in your, rental or your, unless you're in a really unique situation, groceries are probably, everything has probably gone up in your life, right? So are people going to be frustrated when they look online and prices are more? Of course, because everything in their life has gone up. But in the same time, we can kind of recognize, well, they're also used to it, right? They're used to going to the grocery store, and what used to be $200 is now $260. And so it's only to be expected that the things you used to be able to buy online for 30 might be 35 now. So, you got to set those prices. But one of the things that we can leverage inflation, and this is very risky because, we got all these books back here, and I'm really big on not having debt as much as you can possibly have. But if you're a person that's like, hey, this is transitory inflation and, things are going to get perfectly back to normal and the value of the dollar is going to get really, really strong in the future, then you probably don't want to do any kind of borrowing at all. But if you have the mentality that, I think the value of the dollar is going to continue to go down, then it's actually not a bad idea with interest rates as low as they are to potentially borrow money, right? Because when you're borrowing money with the idea of inflation, and nobody knows, like if anybody really knew what the future was, we'd be millionaires, right? Like if you knew what was going to happen with the stock or what was going to happen, you could go either direction and you're going to be fine. So no matter what, you're taking a risk. It's a calculated risk. So this isn't, go out and borrow money. But if you think that inflation is going to continue or get worse, then borrowing money actually makes sense because, I hear when you hear people talking about, I bought my house in the 70s or the 80s and they're still paying a mortgage on it. Maybe they got a second out at one point and they're still paying a mortgage on a house, and you hear what they're paying and it's like, I'm paying, it's a $400 mortgage. when everybody else around you buying a house today is paying a $2,000 or $2,500 or $3,000 mortgage. It's like, whoa, that would be an easy pill to swallow every month, right? Like, here's my $400. Well, it's because when they borrowed the money, that was a lot of money back then. But now the value of the dollar has gotten worse. And so it's not as much money. So you can potentially take out, I mean, that is what the Fed is doing when they lower interest rates, is they are hoping that people will borrow and spend. That's the idea. Because if people spend, the economy gets stimulated and things can get, better, right? Is the idea. So if that happens, if inflation continues, borrowing money makes sense. Now
it becomes more difficult, right? Because you eventually have, banks that are closing credit lines, and you have institutions that are looking, more at your credit score, looking at, what do you have in your savings? What do you have for collateral? Like all those things. But as what Mike says, if you're trying to grow your business, again, we are very much advocates of not having bad debt. But if you are able to get, a decent amount loan during Q4 or whatever it is, and able to grow that business, it may cost you a lot less to pay that back. I would say even 6 months from now.
Yeah.
So just something to think about. Again, that's on the periphery. We're not, because people can get wrecked too, borrowing money.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, either direction, you can be in a really bad position. But if you're in a position where, hey, I always wanted to add this part of my business, or I've always wanted to buy a business van so that I can do, these types of things. And it would be really good, but I don't know if I want to take out a $20,000 loan right now or $30,000 loan to make this happen. Well, if it's a 5-year loan or a 10-year loan on this van, hey, that might actually not be a bad idea. And again, this could be long-term before you realize those profits. But yeah, 10 years from now, if inflation continues going up, the price you're actually paying, that's why you got to get a good interest rate. That's why the idea behind an interest rate is to try and match inflation. But if inflation outpaces the interest rate, you win.
Agreed. Now, the other thing that I really do believe you need to pay attention to is your shipping prices. And this varies for everyone, right? If you have calculated shipping, then it's not going to matter, right? It's no big deal. But, I offer a lot of free shipping on pretty much anything that's first class. I do a lot of flat rate shipping. Now, I do charge that shipping, but I do charge a little bit less than everybody else charges for that, just to be a little bit more competitive. The problem I'm having right now is, especially during Q4, is I'm getting dinged twice. One, holiday prices have gone up, and I haven't raised, well, I am now, but I haven't raised my prices to match the increase. So for example, have you shipped out stuff first class lately, like the top rate?
Yeah.
It's like six something,
yeah.
Right? It's almost priority.
Yep.
Right. So what do? Well, you could maybe pay the extra dollar and ship priority, have happy customers, but you're going to lose a lot of money that way. Or you go in and you adjust it. So I adjusted in my business policies, and all my first class now, where it used to be only $4 to ship for first class, now my flat rate is $6 first class. Now, I only do that for items that are non-clothing. For clothing, I do free. But when it comes to shoes, all right, I do all my flat rate shoes. I at one time was only charging $11.99. And then inflation hit. And so then I upped it to $13 to offset some of that cost. And now it's $14.07 with my top rated seller discount to send out a medium flat rate box. So now I'm upping that shipping to $15. But it gets tricky too, because, are people willing to spend that much on shipping? Right. And, if I have shoes that are worth $30, $40, are people really want to pay $15 to get a pair of shoes like that shipped out? Now, if the pair of shoes is $100, it's not that big of a deal. But you want to make sure that you're leveraging this inflation to work in your favor. You don't want to lose money, but you also want to play into the idea that, hey, people are understanding that prices are going up all around. So they shouldn't see such sticker shock when it comes to your shipping. You just got to play it careful.
Yeah, you just got to be competitive, right? You got to make sure you're charging. The hard part as a reseller is it's going to take a lot of people on eBay time to realize that they need to raise prices and raise shipping. So you're almost competing against people who are hurting themselves. And people are willing to basically run their business at a loss. I mean, you're gonna have a hard time beating that. But eventually they're gonna realize, wait a minute, like this isn't worth it for me anymore. They're gonna end up quitting reselling, or they're gonna end up raising their prices. So there's gonna be an awkward time in there where you've just got to make sure that you're competitive with the items you're selling, and do what the other sellers are doing. If people are raising their prices on Amazon, people are raising their price. You got to raise your prices, and shipping is one of those areas you kind of got to factor in. And then kind of going along with that is you got to make sure you're investing in other things, right? So we talk a lot about investing in other areas, other streams of income, whether it's you're getting into the stock market, you're getting into cryptocurrency, you're building another business, you're buying some real estate, anything you can do to get real assets, because no matter what, our economy is what our economy is. Nothing one person can do is going to be able to fix anything. So the only thing you can do is say, how do I set myself up? It reminds me of Richest Man in Babylon. The idea of paying yourself first isn't even your paycheck, right? The idea is, I'm going to put this money into something that's going to make me money, right? The idea, he called them, what do you call them? Like golden slaves or whatever, right? Like the money making babes, right? But the thing is, you want to make your money make money. And usually a savings account is not the best place for that. You need to have enough of a savings and savings account. Yeah. No. But you want to have money in a savings account enough that, worst case scenario, something happened, your car broke down. Hey, I can cover that.
I think there's a time and place.
Yeah. You need to have enough liquid assets that you're okay, right? You probably shouldn't have every single penny you have in assets that are hard to liquidate. However,
this is not financial advice, by the way.
No, that is absolutely financial advice. You shouldn't have all of your money in unliquidatable assets, because then if something happens, you're in a really bad position. Yeah, you need to have access to some kind of money, but it doesn't always need to be as much as people think, right? Like we liked doing the Dave Ramsey stuff. First it was like $1,000, and I think that's like a good number. Then it's like, all right, then you need a month, then you need 6 months, and at a certain point, it's like, okay, I get 1,000. I even get maybe a month of, in case you lose your job or something happens. But at some point, you want that money making money for you. And 6 months of salary can make a lot of money for you if you've got it invested in different businesses, invested in real estate, and then it could be liquidated, right? Like if stuff hit the fan and you had a month of like, I now can cover this for a month, but I'm foreseeing the next 6 months, I don't have a job, I don't have a way to make money. You can start to liquidate those other assets. It isn't as needed to be as immediate, but you could still do it.
Agree. So, and you got to think about that. Maybe it's just worth just putting the money back into your business as a hedge against inflation, and the fact that now you have more inventory, you're able to sell more, you're able to make more money, right? And so you're still able to bring in more sales, because instead of having that money just sit in a bank account, it's interesting. I'm 100% believer in total money makeover, but I think the whole Ramsey plan applies at a stage when you're in debt or you have no idea how to work with money. Right. And so, for example, I had to go through total money makeover twice. Once, because I had no idea what I was doing. And two, because I got reckless. And the best way to fix everything was, all right, let me pay off on my credit card debt. Let me build up my emergency fund. Let me build up my 6 months. And then once that was done, then the extra money, you apply Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and you get into other businesses, right? Instead of keeping money in a bank that's only going to pay you, I don't know, 3%, 1%, whatever, the garbage return is.
Yeah. And I like what you said about potentially investing in your own business, even with hard assets that you could sell, right? So you're buying inventory, and inflation can work for you in the sense of you can hedge against inflation by saying, hey, I'm going to use Legos as an example. If you were buying Legos 30 years ago or 20 years ago, you probably weren't paying the prices of a new box of Legos today, right? And a lot of those have become super collectible. So if you're buying good products with inflation, the money you're spending today, when you sell that item, it's going to account for the inflation, right? Because people have more money, they'll sell it. And so so maybe you bought it at $10, you could sell it for $50 today. But if you sell it 5 years from now for $75, that might account for the inflation that happened. And you still were able to hedge against that, and you didn't lose money.
Yeah, these were all just ideas that Mike and I wanted to discuss. Inflation is, I don't see anybody out there in the reselling space talking about inflation, but it's a big deal, because I guarantee there's going to be many that are going to look at how much they sold, and they're going to realize they actually made less money with more sales in comparison to the year before. So got to be careful about that. So make sure you're understanding you can pay yourself as a reseller, part-time, full-time. You set the prices. You have opportunities to borrow now that will open up. Shipping, you got to be careful about. And overall, understand that you need to invest in a way that inflation works to your advantage. And with that being said, make sure to be real,
be relevant,
and be reselling. Peace.